Okay, first of all, I'd just like to acknowledge and pay respects to the traditional owners of this land, the Kaurna people. And I'd like to welcome you all here today for this pre-election live animal export protest. And thank you all for coming. I'm Lisa Wilson from Animal Liberation South Australia, otherwise known as the crazy megaphone lady. We've got a number of speakers today, including the Animal Justice Party, the Greens, MOP, the Port Adelaide Monitors, and the Australian... sorry, we've had a change in that. The Democrats won't be speaking today. We hope that today you will leave here more informed about a few of the views of the political parties, including the two major parties, and on their stand on the live animal export trade. Animal Liberation would like to stress that we do not share all of the views and or policies of political parties speaking here today. We do advocate for a plant-based diet and are strongly opposed to the exploitation and slaughter of animals. So the point of this rally is to inform you of your choices when voting on September the 7th. I will now share with you a few of the statements according to the Voiceless website from a few of the political parties. These can actually be viewed on the Voiceless website. Where's my poster, people? Okay, the first is from Mark Pearson of the Animal Justice Party, who is the New South Wales Senate candidate. Mark says, "We're calling for a complete ban on live export. This trade confines animals in a completely unnatural environment, under distressing physical conditions and with considerable emotional deprivation." Labor's view: where does Labor plan to invest? 60 million to boost investment in Indonesia's cattle industry. 1.8 million to improve animal welfare standards. Labor's policy on live export is focused on creating a sustainable industry on the back of the Exporter Supply Chain Assurance Scheme, or SCAS as we know it. Despite this, there has been some very loud voices within the Labor caucus for a ban on live export. One of those being Steve Georgianis, who has spoke at many of our protests in the past. He's the Labor member for Hindmarsh. And the other being Tony Zappia, who is a Labor member for Macon. Both of these candidates are fighting for their seats in this election, and they do need your support. Then we move on to Lee Rhiannon from the Greens, who is their animal welfare spokesperson. Lee says the government should be moving to end the live export trade and expand processed meat exports if it wants to be a voice for animal welfare. I'll let Sarah elaborate on that later. The last one, and unfortunately I've left the worst to last, is from the Leader of the Opposition, Tony Abbott. You wait till you hear what he has to say. The first thing we'll be doing is going to Indonesia and apologising for the way the current government has mishandled the situation. The only mishandling, as far as I'm concerned, is the fact that they didn't ban it completely. The Coalition has no interest in supporting an independent Office of Animal Welfare. Let me repeat that. They have no interest in supporting an Office of Animal Welfare. They will also be removing the red tape, which essentially means removing SCAS to make it easier for live animal exporters. So if you are thinking about voting for the Coalition, you won't be voting for animals. So if you could please listen closely to our speakers today to hear what they have to say. And when you're voting on September the 7th, really think about the animals when you're standing there wondering who to vote for. We've got a few speakers today, and starting us off will be Sally Sutton from the Animal Justice Party.
Thanks, guys. Where's Deb? My dog holder. This is Shoo Shoo. Shoo Shoo came from SA Dog Rescue. She's suffering with cancer, but we're treating her. That's why her fur's a bit sparse. Thanks, Deb. I want to start with a piece of advice that Phil Wallen gave me earlier this year. He said to me, ask yourself, what would the animals have you do? They would say, do it. This is my philosophy, and this is why I decided to run for the AJP. Because I don't believe that there is a voice loud enough for the animals in Parliament right now. And I'm talking about live export, but I'm also talking a lot of other issues as well that are just as important. 50 years ago this month, Martin Luther King gave his inspirational I Have a Dream speech. That was 50 years ago this month. That was commemorated in Washington DC a few days ago by Barack Obama, the first African American president. 50 years ago when the Reverend Martin Luther King was giving that speech, he would not have thought that there would have been a African American in the White House. But there is. And that to me shows that dreams can come true. And I too have a dream. My dream's for the animals. My dream is that all animals will be afforded rights based on their sentience, not based on their economic viability. The AJP came about because Steve Garlick, who's the president, 4 years ago found out about a cull that was going to occur in Canberra, a kangaroo cull, where they were planning on killing hundreds of kangaroos and hundreds of joeys. This cull was actually quite unnecessary, particularly because Steve and his team, Steve is an expert with macropods, had a non-lethal way of removing those kangaroos and relocating them. He lobbied every government, every party he lobbied, unsuccessfully. It was then he thought, we need someone to really represent the animals, so I'm going to create my own party. And that's what he's done. That's why the AJP came about. The annual cull has taken place now 4 times. Just recently it took place again. Hundreds of slaughtered kangaroos, hundreds of joeys, all unnecessarily. This was supported by all parties. So to live exports. Most of my days are spent campaigning against live exports in one way or another. When I'm not out doing rallies, I'm doing a lot of other things towards this campaign, and the latest one has been to do with feedlots. Because believe me, every stage of the live export process is problematic. It's not just when they're on ships, it's not just when they arrive at those other countries. It starts right here. Right here, the way they're transported, the way that they're loaded and unloaded, the way they are at feedlots. So we've been focusing on feedlots a lot lately, and I have to say that I've had some little successes. Quite big successes actually, but more about that in time. But things are happening. There is hope. I am chipping away at this industry with animal liberation and with the Animal Justice Party, chipping away to destabilise it and to ultimately destroy it forever. Once the election's passed, I'll still be here, AJP will still be here, and Animal Lib will still be here, regardless of the result. We'll never be silenced and we'll never give up. All the while animals have no voice in the corridors of power, I will not give up. That's my promise, and I mean it. I'm passionate about animals. defend their right to live in peace and be regarded as someone and not something. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Next, we have Rebekah Ayres from the Port Adelaide Monitors speaking. I'll just give her a chance to come on down. And I think today she's talking about the live animal export regulations, and she'll tell you a little bit about what the Port Adelaide Monitors do as well. Rebekah Ayres.
Thank you so much. That was a bit of a sea of dogs to cross there. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody so much for giving up your very important, very treasured Saturday mornings to be here. To be here to represent the voiceless, to be here to represent a cause that we've all felt so much grief over for way too long now. I wanted to start off just by acknowledging some of the individuals and some of the organisations that have taken huge personal risks and spent very scant resources on capturing footage, capturing imagery and information on how exactly our poor live export animals have been treated over the last 30 years. So of course that's organisations like Animals Australia, the very brave Lynn White, also people like Lynn Simpson, the very brave Australian vet who for some time had worked on the ships and only in the last 6 months released a lot of information and actually a lot of photographs of the conditions that those animals experience on ships. Now, previous to that, most of us here in the community had absolutely no idea what sort of conditions those poor animals were being exposed to in the ships. So that was rather a step forward in terms of the information we get. Another organisation I'd like to acknowledge, and this is a smaller organisation than Animals Australia, international organisation Animals Angels. They're based in Germany. They're actually quite prominent in Europe, but less so here. Animals Angels has actually had a representative stationed on the dock at Fremantle for probably the last 7 or 8 years. And that person has copped a lot of flack, as you can imagine. It's a very difficult environment in Fremantle. But over that period of time, she has witnessed probably almost very close to every ship that has come in and every ship that is left with animals. She's monitored on behalf of Animals Angels, she's monitored the handling of the animals and the condition of the animals and made several complaints. And certainly, you know, without Animals Australia, Lynn White, vets like Dr. Lynn Simpson, Animals Angels, we would not have the insight that we now have about the terrible suffering that our animals have endured. So just wanted to acknowledge that. We're definitely indebted to them. I'd just like to give you a quick introduction to Port Adelaide Monitors, or better known as PAM. Basically, we're just a couple of people who came together following the terrible Al-Masila incident in the end of 2011 that occurred at Port Adelaide. Many of you were probably there at the time. This is an incident in which the Al-Masila ship, of course, experienced some failure in its ventilation system, and as a result 67,000 sheep on board the ship were then sorry, I've lost my train of thought. We're then actually held up within the ship and effectively stranded for several days at Port Adelaide and just off the Adelaide coast as well. Now, as a result of that failure of the ventilation system, you can imagine what sort of suffering the animals incurred. Several hundred of the animals on that ship died, and many more experienced a great deal of suffering as a result of that. This incident actually went on for several days, and for those of us who were at Port Adelaide during the Almasila incident, it was rather chaotic, and we certainly had some shocks about the live export industry. The first shock I think that a lot of community members experienced watching that incident play out was that when the RSPCA, the state regulator, arrived at the ship to inspect those animals on board, they were initially denied access to inspect those animals. The exporters, in fact, made it extremely difficult for them. They eventually gained access, but it was a very, very hard process for them. I think one of the second major shock that some of us observers of that incident experienced was that when the last sheep were being unloaded off the Almasila, of course they were the sick ones, they were the very, very weak ones. We had expected that they would be, very gently carried off the ship. They would be treated on site as the regulation stipulates. Unfortunately, instead, they were dragged very, very roughly down the ramp, down a wooden ramp that has ridges, quite high ridges in it. And some of those very, very weak and possibly dying sheep, Australian sheep, were actually yanked down the ramp by one leg. So this is happening in Australia, and this happened at the end of the Almasila incident. So what we learnt, what community members learnt from observing that incident is, as Sally was saying previously, there is a lot of suffering for those animals before they even step foot on that ship. Now, we were very lucky in that we decided that, okay, really some of us should try and observe each loading. They shouldn't go unnoticed because, as you know, live export operates most of the time right out of the public eye, which is the main problem. We decided that some of us should try and observe every ship that comes in. We should try and log the ships that come in. And so we formed a group called Port Adelaide Monitors, better known as PAM. We were extremely lucky, and we're very, very grateful to Voiceless for giving us a grant that was enough for us to get some very good cameras, because of course we need an excellent zoom at the port to see anything at all that's occurring with those animals, because we are behind federal government security enclosures and we have to strain the zoom to see what's happening to the animals. But we're very grateful to Voiceless to have received that grant and to have that camera equipment. As far as the aims of Port Adelaide Monitors, our aims are pretty simple. What we would like to do is to keep a log of every ship that comes in and every ship that leaves, keep a log of what animals are being loaded, what sort of major animal welfare problems they may be having, make formal complaints where necessary, take evidence and lodge it with state regulators and Commonwealth regulators, and also to communicate or basically capture a snapshot of the experiences that those animals have before they leave our shores. So those experiences, as Sally was saying, begin when the animals leave their original farm. They often endure a very long transport to the feedlot, and then after the feedlot they have another transport to the port, and then there's the whole unloading process, which is extremely stressful for them, and they're often goaded, very roughly, very, very rough process. So what we wanted to do was capture a snapshot of what those animals experience and try and communicate that back to the community, because that's the kind of information that the community has been missing for a long time. And finally, the last thing we wanted to do is to, if we could do nothing else, at least we could bear witness to what we are exposing our animals to what the live export industry and our federal government is condoning. So we wanted to bear witness and keep a record of that. In terms of the frequency of the ships, initially I think about 2 years ago it was about a live export ship came into Adelaide probably once every 8 to 10 weeks. That then became 6 weeks. Earlier this year it was probably around the 6 or 7 week mark. The end of 2013, unfortunately, they've ramped it up. We're now getting a live export ship into the Port of Adelaide approximately once a month. The last live export ships that we've had in Adelaide, just remember these names, the Gina, the Beta 3, and also the Pearl of Para. And journeys that our poor animals are undertaking are tending to be to Jordan, Israel and to Turkey. Most of these journeys are around about 3 to 4 weeks long, and one of the most stressful factors for the animals once they arrive there is of course that they would be leaving our winter. Just previously they left our winter to arrive in a Middle Eastern summer with temperatures between 31 and 37 degrees. So very, very difficult for them indeed. Just to say a few quick things about the very last ship that came in. That was the Beta 3. That actually loaded in Adelaide on the 16th of August. Now this ship, you may remember if you've been watching social media, this is the very disgraced ship that only a matter of weeks ago unloaded our South Australian and Western Australian sheep in port in Israel, and when they arrived they were so exhausted they found it quite difficult to walk off the ramp themselves. They were thrown, kicked and punched. Now fortunately in this situation it's rather unusual at a destination port that anybody is witnessing or recording this. Fortunately there was an Israeli there who took that footage and spread it on social media, and that's really the only reason why we know that suffering occurred with those animals, and they were our animals. Now most shocking we thought was that Beta 3 ship then returned to South Australia only a number of weeks later to reload sheep again. Now we know that first shipment that arrived in Israel and the sheep that were kicked and punched down the ramp, we know that there was a complaint lodged with Department of Ag, Fisheries and Forestry, but we also know that the outcome of that complaint is likely to be that Department of Ag, Fisheries and Forestry will not in fact hold those exporters accountable and will allow them to continue live exporting, which is fairly disgusting. So as you can see, the processes of Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry to protect our animals are pretty much useless. Just in terms of why we believe the live export regulatory system is fairly doomed. It's, as Sally was saying, it's a very long chain of animal handling between their original property to the port, then the long voyage, then unloading at the destination country. It's absolutely illogical to think that the Australian regulatory system could actually have oversight at each one of these points to protect our animals. It's completely illogical and it can't occur. Also, once our animals arrive in their destination country, of course, they're considered the property of the importer. How likely is it that Australia will be able to sufficiently influence the importer to treat the animals in a more respectful or compassionate manner? Not very likely. We know that Department of Ag, Fisheries and Forestry over the 18 months has itself not actually identified any regulatory incompliance. The incompliance has always been identified by animal welfare groups, and we also know that as far as we know, exporters' licences haven't in fact been revoked. It's not all doom and gloom, however. We are going to get an Inspector General to oversee Department of Ag, Fisheries and Forestry. Of course, we're rather cynical about this because the Labor government did in fact promise us an independent Office of Animal Welfare, but this may be a very, very tiny step along the way, we hope. The Department of Ag, Fisheries and Forestry, largely as a result of the public, has been forced to be a little more accountable about live export processes. That's a small step forward. And most of all, I'd like to acknowledge that it was actually the South Australian community members getting in touch with our local councils that resulted in a number of South Australian councils taking the live export issue to the National Local Government Conference in Canberra very recently, and advocating that the group of councils as a whole advocate on behalf of their residents for a ban on live export. Now unfortunately that wasn't furthered and it caused some very, very nasty fights. But we can at least say that it was us South Australians who were able to elevate that issue into that forum. And finally, I'd like to say just, a general message to our politicians. We'd really like the politicians to acknowledge and realise that the live export process has not just taken a toll on our poor suffering animals, it's taken a terrible toll on community members. It's taken a terrible toll on us, individuals in the community who feel terrible grief every time a ship arrives, individuals in the community who feel absolutely disgusted that despite all the evidence that live export is a very cruel trade, continue to condone it. And the degree of grief that many community members are feeling over live export is in fact impairing their daily lives and ability to function. So we'd like politicians to know it's taking a toll on people as well as animals. And finally to finish, we'd like the politicians to know that it's not only the human animals who tremble before violence, it's all animals that tremble before violence. And our live export animals are not dispensable pawns to suffer in silence while the government and industry perfect what is a very complex regulatory experiment in international trade. We, the community, as moral guardians of our live export animals, now officially withdraw the live export industry's social licence to operate. Thank you.
Fantastic bit of information there from the Port Adelaide Monitors, Rebekah Ayers. And sorry to move her on a bit, it's just that we have another rally on straight after us today, so we are a bit limited for time. Next we've got the SA Greens Senator, Sarah Hanson-Young. Please make her welcome. Thank you everybody, I'll try and keep this relatively short. Thank you for coming out today, and thank you for always being here to raise your voice and to make it very clear to those of us in Canberra that banning live exports must be a political priority for all political parties. I, like many of you, have been monitoring the community reaction to the horrid trade of live exports, particularly over the last few years where we've seen more and more footage of the realities, the horrid, cruel, inhumane realities of what the live export trade is doing to Australian animals and the impact that that's having on Australia's international reputation as well. And when those photos and footage are played through the Australian media, it is the one issue that as MPs we are instantly flooded by the Australian community over. There is a real sense out there in our neighbourhoods, in our suburbs, in our country towns, as well as in the metropolitan areas, that Australians do not feel right about Australia trading in such cruelty. It is, and it's because of you coming out here all the time, willing to raise your voice and say, well, we can't just accept lip service from politicians on this, we actually need real action. And that means a legislative change. We need to be banning on our statute books live export. No ifs, no buts, just get it done. The Greens have obviously been working in the federal parliament to do this, but I take the comments of previous speakers. More voices for animals and the humane treatment of animals in the parliament is absolutely welcome, and we should be having more MPs standing up within political parties and as this key issue. And to say that, I'd just like to say, I think Steve Georgianis, obviously a Labor member here in South Australia, he deserves some credit for being able to put himself on the line in his own party room. And as does Tammy Franks, the Green MLC here in State Parliament, who has been raising this issue every day in the Parliament and will be making sure that not just after this federal election is this campaign going to stop in South Australia, it needs to be now taken up to the state Labor government. They have responsibility here as well. We've heard a lot about what's going on in Fremantle on a federal level. Well, the same thing is happening here in Port Adelaide, and it's time to put the focus back on the state government as well. And Tammy Franks is doing a great job highlighting that in State Parliament. Thank you, Tammy. The The Greens pledge to, again, we've already got bills before both the Senate and the House of Representatives to ban live exports. We will introduce them again after this Parliament, because after every Parliament, bills dissolve and they need to be put back on the table. We will do that. We will also move to establish an independent animal welfare office. And the Labor Party had this as part of their policy back in 2011, and nothing has been done on it. And now, we're staring down the barrel of an Abbott government unless there is a strong voice in the Parliament to say, let's have proper independent monitoring, experts who can inform government of what's really going on, and some actual consequences when things don't happen and don't go the way the government says they should. Unless we have those things in place, you can bet your bottom dollar that a Tony Abbott government is going to turn a blind eye. We've heard his statement to this issue, and it's appalling. And thankfully, it is out of step with what the majority of Australians feel. So we keep this campaign going beyond September 7th. It will be the Australian community who demand better from an Abbott-led government, and we need to make sure those people are represented strongly in the federal parliament, which means having a good, strong voice in the Senate. I know there's a number of candidates here in South Australia this election who are running on this platform, and good on them. Absolutely good on them. Together with the Greens, we can make sure we have a good, strong voice to advocate for a full ban on live exports, a proper independent animal welfare office, and to ensure that whoever wins the government of the day, that there is no one party that can have absolute power to push through their blinded mind when it comes to what should be being done. A ban on live exports, investing in the production of meat locally, is not just good for animals, but it's actually good for Australian jobs. And that's the way we should be selling it to our federal politicians. Thank you very much, everybody. Keep up the great work. Thanks very much, Sarah. Next we have Raelene, Govett, and she is from the Members of the Public, or MOP.
Hi everyone. First of all, I want to thank Animal Liberation for organising this rally, and thank you to all of you who came out today to support our animals. Thank you everyone for continuing to educate yourself about the trade. You are directly counteracting industry spin. Spin such as the suspension of trade to Egypt. Does everybody remember the self-imposed suspension after the last lot of footage came out of Egypt? Yeah? Okay, were you aware that the trade lost no money whatsoever with that self-imposed suspension? Trade had already halted to Egypt last year. So there was no trade to Egypt when they imposed that self-imposed suspension. So Alison Penfold and the trade, they told a blatant lie. Do you remember what the dispute was about? It was about the growth hormone implants that were in the ears of the cattle. Do you remember that? That was when there was talk that they were going to cut the ears off the cattle. There's been no transport, no live export to Egypt ever since. I also want to thank you for continuing to get information about all the recent incidences coming out of the trade out to the public. There has been no media attention about any of the recent footage. If not for you and people like you, the general public would think that the trade has been fixed, and we all know that it has not been fixed. It's just as bad now as it ever was. Mainly, I want to thank all of you for continuing to fight, even though it hurts. But you guys, you plough through the hurt and you keep fighting strong. Good on you. But remember, you are not alone. There is some fantastic work being done overseas as well with live export. Live export is a global issue. Look at the fantastic work being done by organisations such as CALE and Stop Live Exports from the Port of Ramsgate in the UK. ARAN is based in Ireland. They're also doing some wonderful work around the trade. Animals Angels, tackling long-haul transport in Europe. They've been doing that for a very long time. NSPCA works out of South Africa. They are also working hard to end live export. Compassion in World Farming is another one that's doing some excellent work. These are just a few. Look at the work being done by activists in Israel. They are very brave over there. And what about that wonderfully brave vet in Egypt? You are not alone, we are not alone, and our animals are no longer alone. So to sum up, never ever underestimate just how much of a difference you make. Please give yourself a well-deserved applause. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Raelene. Our next speaker today is Dusan Popovic, and I think I've pronounced his name correctly. He's the Greens candidate for Port Adelaide.
Thank you so much. Perfect pronunciation. That was well nailed. Thanks very much, everyone. My name's Dusan Popovic. I'm the Greens candidate in the seat of Port Adelaide. I won't go on too long because we were very fortunate enough to have Senator Hanson-Young here today to stress to you the ongoing hard work that the Greens are doing on animal welfare issues in both state parliament and federal parliament, and that's always been one of the core values of the Greens, and it will continue to do so. What I really wanted to stress to everyone here today is that for me personally, I'm running in the seat of Port Adelaide, and it's been said about some of the other Labor ministers and Labor representatives who have been making a vocal opposition to the cruel live export trade. But what we see is that they're completely hamstrung in what those few individuals can do. The likes of Steve Georgianis commend his work, but he's so hamstrung in what he can actually do in a party that doesn't really care about animals and about animal welfare. So what I wanted to really get across with you today is that I have been passionate.
You got that one? You got looking.
For as long as I can remember, I've been incredibly passionate about two things in particular, and that's the first thing is the conservation of our environment and strong action on climate change, and the second thing is humane treatment of animals. That's something for as long as I can remember I've been passionate about, and that is one of the reasons that I actually got involved in politics to begin with, and that's something that I'm going to be continuing to fight for. If you look at from a lower house perspective, the people that I'm going up against in the seat of Port Adelaide have a track record of not caring at all about animal welfare issues. And what I'd like to stress to you is that you have the chance next Saturday to actually make a difference when you stand in the ballot box. I've been rallying, and I know there's a lot of familiar faces here. We've been rallying, we've been calling on the government, we've been standing on these steps of Parliament House a number of times, and nothing has changed. So you can vote for some of the older parties in the hope that they will actually take this issue on board and make a change. Or you can vote for a party like the Greens or the other parties that are here today and know that we will actually address this issue and put animal welfare first. So thanks very much.
Thanks for that, Dusan. Our last speaker today is Colin Thomas, and he's the lead SA Senate candidate for the Animal Justice Party.
Well, it would seem very much that the issue of live animal exports has dropped off the radar if you look at the policies and the actions are only guided by the Labor Party and the Coalition. So it's very pleasing to see so many turn up today, so thank you very much. 30th of May 2011 was a defining moment in Australia for animal justice and in particular live animal export. That evening, the Four Corners program, A Bloody Business, went to air highlighting the cruelty inflicted upon cattle we exported to Indonesia. Overnight, hundreds of thousands of people across the country became passionate, vocal animal activists, compelled to speak out against the shocking cruelty they had just witnessed. In 1985, almost 30 years ago, a Senate Select Committee determined that if it were to be judged on cruelty alone, the live export trade should end. But we've seen economic interests prevail over animal welfare with successive governments. The Liberal Party wants to apologise for the suspension of the trade to Indonesia, and Labor has signed off on deals to ramp up live exports again. A very big boo. A recent poll conducted by Nielsen on behalf of the World Society for the Protection of Animals found that 3/4 of Labor and undecided voters and more than half of Liberal voters are more likely to vote for a candidate who promised an outright end to the live export trade. Why then, Mr Rudd, are you not listening to the vast majority of Australian citizens on this issue? The Animal Justice Party will ensure that this majority sentiment on this issue will be translated into legislation in the Australian Parliament. In the same poll, only 3% of Liberal voters and 2% of Labor voters were strongly opposed to an MP or candidate who wants to end live export. Make no mistake, it will make no difference whether Rudd or Abbott becomes Australia's next leader. Both will look to expand the brutal and sickening live export industry to all parts of the globe. The live animal export trade must end, and it will. The only question is when. Sally spoke before about dreams she has in relation to animals, animal welfare, animal cruelty, animal justice. I dream of living in a world where no animal has to undergo the distress of live export or the misery of factory farming. While the AJP represents the cattle and sheep sailing to their brutal death in a foreign land, we also represent some other animals. The battery cage hen, the sow unable to move in her stall, the dairy cow forced to reproduce and then separated from her calf, the kangaroo shot for being a pest, lying next to a dead joey, destined to be dog food, and our beautiful wild brumbies shot from the air as they attempt to flee with their foals. The ducks that rise from our wetlands to be shot or injured for sport and entertainment. The horses that die from horrific injuries in the cruel sport of jumps racing so that they can be a name on a betting ticket. And the laboratory mouse, rabbit or dog cowering in its steel cage awaiting the horrors of medical and scientific experimentation. So how then is the AJP different from other parties, such as the Greens or the Democrats, when it comes to animal justice issues? The AJP does not have competing party agendas diverting attention away from animal issues. Addressing animal justice issues is our sole purpose. It's our sole purpose. It's what we do. It's all we do. There's no competing agendas. No one's denying social justice issues aren't important, but animal justice issues is our sole purpose. The AJP does not have lone voices who are unable to speak up or act upon animal issues because other party agendas are deemed more important. All Animal Justice Party senators will be acting as representatives of non-human animals on all issues, all of the time. On all issues, they will consider the rights of animals first and foremost. On this, there will be no compromise compromise ever. This is where the AJP is different from other political parties, including the Greens and the Democrats. Next Saturday, you'll have the chance to vote for the same senators, the same tired old senators of every political colour, including Green, who have failed to grasp the magnitude of public anger with unjust laws that do not give animals a voice. It's an absolute privilege to be given the chance to have the balance of power in Canberra, and it's important that it's not abused, or it's used appropriately to get major reforms for animals, and we would do that. Or you can cast your vote for the Animal Justice Party, where you can be completely confident on each and every issue we will speak up on their behalf. The AJP is standing 12 Senate candidates in 5 states and the ACT, with Sally Sutton and I representing the party in South Australia. We are committed to supporting legislation and policy that has the least negative impact on animals, including their right to be free from human abuse, cruelty, confinement and slavery. Our sole purpose is clear: to end all forms of animal cruelty, live export, intensive factory farming, puppy farms, the slaughter of our native wildlife. The list is endless. Animal cruelty stops when, as a society, we make a compassionate stand and say enough is enough. And enough is enough. Live export will end, and it'll end soon. September 7 marks a watershed moment in Australian politics for animal representation and justice. True representation in Canberra for our animal friends starts with a vote for the AJP in the Senate. Vote 1 for the AJP to stop the boats, live export boats. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Colin. That's our last speaker today, so I just want to do a few thank yous here at the end, if that's okay. I want to thank all of the speakers: Rebekah Ayers from the Port Adelaide Monitors, Raelene Govett from MOP, Sarah Hanson-Young from the Greens, Dusan Popovic from the Greens, Sally Sutton from the AJP, Colin Thomas, so I also want to thank Daniel and Deborah for the use of this PA again today. These things are very expensive to hire, so to get one on loan is fantastic. I want to thank Amanda for helping out with the stall today. And I especially want to thank everybody here. I remember listening to an interview with Lynn White many years ago about the live export trade, and when she was investigating in the Middle East. And I remember her saying she felt like she was the only person in Australia that cared about these animals. Well, Adelaide certainly has shown her that that's not true, and you should all be really proud of yourselves. We are known by other organisations and in other states as the caring state because we do so much, take so much action for the live animal export trade. So I'd really like you to give yourselves a huge round of applause. It's very well deserved. So I also forgot to mention in the intro, apologies from Steve Georgianis, he couldn't be here today, obviously with the election coming up, he's a little bit busy. When you're voting on September the 7th, please really think about your vote, really think about the animals. And we have one more thing that we'd like, if anyone would like to have their photographs taken with this photo, I know it's not particularly appealing because it's Tony Abbott, but it does say, not in my name, not in my name. So if you want to have your photo taken with this banner, and then you can post it on Facebook and put it wherever you like. But let's really get this out there so that Australians know if they vote for Tony Abbott, you know, the animals are just going to get a very, very raw deal. So thank you all for coming today. Thank you very much.